The Dore Lectures on Mental Science. By Thomas Troward. Lecture 1. Entering to the Spirit of It. Part 2 of 2. Now this is the spirit that we need to enter into, and the method of doing so is a perfectly logical one. It is the same method by which all scientific advance is made. It consists in first observing how a certain law works under the conditions spontaneously provided by nature, next in carefully considering what principle this spontaneous working indicates, and lastly deducing from this how the same principle would act under specially selected conditions, not spontaneously provided by nature. The progress of shipbuilding affords a good example of what I mean. Formerly wood was employed instead of iron, because wood floats in water and iron sinks, yet now the navies of the world are built of iron. Careful thought showed the law of flotation to be that anything could float which, bulk for bulk, is lighter than the mass of liquid displaced by it, and so we now make iron float by the very same law by which it sinks, because by the introduction of the personal factor, we provide conditions which do not occur spontaneously, according to the esoteric maxim that nature unaided fails. Now we want to apply the same process of specializing a generic law to the first of all laws, that of the generic life-giving tendency of spirit itself. Without the element of individual personality, the spirit can only work cosmically by a generic law, but this law admits of far higher specialization, and this specialization can only be attained through the introduction of the personal factor. But to introduce this factor, the individual must be fully aware of the principle which underlies the spontaneous or cosmic action of the law. Where, then, will he find this principle of life? Certainly not by contemplating death. In order to get a principle to work in the way we require it to, we must observe its action when it is working spontaneously in this particular direction. We must ask why it goes in the right direction as far as it does, and having learnt this we shall then be able to make it go further. The law of flotation was not discovered by contemplating the sinking of things, but by contemplating the floating of things which floated naturally, and then intelligently asking why they did so. The knowledge of a principle is to be gained by the study of its affirmative action, when we understand that we are in a position to correct the negative conditions which tend to prevent that action. Now death is the absence of life, and disease is the absence of health, so to enter into the spirit of life we require to contemplate it, where it is to be found, and not where it is not. We are met with the old question, why seek ye the living among the dead? This is why we start our studies by considering the cosmic creation, for it is there that we find the life spirit working through untold ages, not merely as deathless energy, but with a perpetual advance into higher degrees of life. If we could only so enter into the spirit as to make it personally in ourselves what it evidently is in itself, the magnum opus would be accomplished. This means realizing our life as drawn direct from the originating spirit, and if we now understand that the thought or imagination of the spirit is the great reality of being, and that all material facts are only correspondences, then it logically follows that what we have to do is to maintain our individual place in the thought of the parent mind. We have seen that the action of the originating mind must needs be generic, that is according to types which include multitudes of individuals. This type is the reflection of the creative mind at the level of that particular genius, and at the human level it is man, not as associated with particular circumstances, but as existing in the absolute ideal. In proportion then as we learn to dissociate our conception of ourselves from particular circumstances, and to rest upon our absolute nature, as reflections of the divine ideal, we, in our turn, reflect back into the divine imagination its original conception of itself as expressed in generic or typical man, and so by a natural law of cause and effect, the individual who realizes this mental attitude enters permanently into the spirit of life, and it becomes a perennial fountain of life springing up spontaneously within him. He then finds himself to be, as the Bible says, the image and likeness of God. He has reached the level at which he affords a new starting point for the creative process, and the spirit, finding a personal center in him, begins its work de novo, having thus solved the great problem of how to enable the universal to act directly upon the plane of the particular. It is in this sense, as affording the requisite center for a new departure of the creative spirit, that man is said to be a microcosm, or universe in miniature, and this is also what is meant by the esoteric doctrine of the octave, of which I may be able to speak more fully on some other occasion. If the principles here stated are carefully considered, they will be found to throw light on much that would otherwise be obscure, and they will also afford the key to the succeeding essays. The reader is therefore asked to think them out carefully for himself, and to note their connection with the subject of the next article. Lecture 1. Entering to the Spirit of It. End of lecture. Need help understanding Troward's teachings? The Thomas Troward lectures contain very deep and powerful information, but to get the most out of them, require repeated listening and in-depth study. Troward had only one personal student, Genevieve Behrend, and her book Your Invisible Power distills the essence of Troward's lectures in a concise and easy-to-understand format. For many, this is a much preferred way to learn Troward's teachings. Click the link below this video to visit yourinvisiblepower.us and learn more about Genevieve Behrend's recently updated book.
Click the link in the description below for a chance to win 10 classic best-selling Law of Attraction books